gentlemen, the acoustic silence of Mr. Ben Proper.
Howdy, everybody. We're talking about dry or powdered pigments and dyes today as it relates primarily to touch-up. I do a lot of my touch-up mostly with powders. I've never had a whole lot of success using, let me just get rid of something, hang on. I've never had a whole lot of success using like the trans tint or the liquid dyes or the concentrated dyes whenever I'm dealing with touch-up work, because it to me it gets very every color I use gets very dark very quickly. I have a hard time mixing colors because I can't really see the colors as they're developing, or as they're quote unquote being massaged into whatever color I'm looking for when I'm doing touch-up. So I've always gravitated towards powdered pigments and powdered dyes. Do we need to do any conversation about the differences between pigments and dyes?
I think could be okay as just a refresher, like a
Yeah.
brief refresher.
Okay. So from a practical standpoint, the primary difference for me between pigments and dyes is a dye is something that is soluble in whatever medium you're using to dilute the color. So if you're using it in water, if you're using it in alcohol, if you're using it in whatever medium you're using it, it's soluble into that medium, as opposed to a pigment which is suspended in a given medium. And pigments, by and large, are not soluble in water. And when they're in another medium, they have it. They don't dissolve into that medium fully. They become suspended in it. And of course, as the medium dries, if the color remains well diluted or well suspended in the medium, um, then you've got what you want to look for in terms of your desired results. From the standpoint of a chemical standpoint, a dye is typically an organic compound. A pigment is an inorganic compound that usually comes from some earth matter, copper, zinc, iron, or some other such source that then is processed into a color. Dyes, at least in a modern standpoint, are they're an organic compound, mostly um, from the 1800s, made from a chemical compound called aniline. And we all have heard the term aniline dyes. And when we hear it, it sounds like some ancient um, technology, but it's not. It's actually quite new. Only as of the mid 1800s have we been making colors from aniline chemical compounds. Aniline, prior to that, dyes would have come from organic materials, trees, shrubs, flowers, food stuff, and pigments would have come from what you would consider earthy type stuff, more like earth materials, iron oxides, stuff like that. From a practical standpoint, when you're dealing with touch-up, to me, I put the two camps um, for dyes and pigments and I look at them in these two ways. One, a dye is translucent, a pigment is opaque. And that's the one primary thing I concern myself with, is do I want to see through it or not? So if I've got something on a guitar that I'm trying to color to match what's there, but I'm trying to cover something up, a screw hole, a cross grain line, or something like that, I'm going to lean towards a pigment, unless of course I'm very dark. Then you can get away with a dye that's translucent. And dyes, of course, are colors that you can see through. And remember, we're talking about touch up here. We're not talking about guitar finishing. Very often you'll hear about dyed guitars if you think about like Paul Reed Smith or something like that, where you've got these dyes that are applied either via alcohol or water directly to a wood so that the color soaks into the wood and then you finish over it. That's a different dyeing um, process. I'm talking about for touch up, I'm talking about doing repair work and how I use them. Um, that's just a to me a roundup of what I consider the difference between the two materials that you're dealing with, and they both come in powdered forms. Dyes come in powdered forms, and pigments come in powdered forms. Probably the most popular of which is the Mohawk Blendall uh, pigments. They didn't. In fact, they don't. I don't even think they call it a pigment. They call it a stain. I think on their bottle. Um,
I think they call them pigment stains, which is pigmented stains, which is even more confusing.
Yeah, right on the label it says Blendall powder stain, which doesn't really tell you very much about what it is or what it does, other than that it's in powdered form. So if I'll just jump to the screen share real quick because just to look at it from a historical perspective, powdered dyes and or pigments, as we use them today, are different than it has been throughout all of history. All of history used color from some other material, whether it be a plant or whether it be a food stuff like a nut or something like that. Um, let me quickly share screen and I'll show you an example of what I'm talking about. So before the mid 1800s, and you can still do this today. I'm not a big advocate of using natural dyes. One, they're harder to work with. Two, they're harder to dissolve. They have a tendency to fade over time compared to like a modern aniline dye. And but it's just interesting to look at where history uh, used color and how they used color, and mostly was from stuff that they would find every day. For example, if we look at the first example on the list here of a natural dye, is walnut, and that would produce a color we commonly refer to as like Van Dyke brown. Or if you look over here at madder, madder is another common natural dye that's still in use today for people who like to use natural dyes. And that gives you a tannish red kind of color. And the dyes have been used obviously for textiles, clothing, leather, wood throughout history, and whatever you wanted to turn into a color. If we scroll down a little bit, you can see a lot of things that are very natural looking things. Here, this one was always interesting to me. This is lac. Um, Everybody knows I'm a big shellac guy. I do a lot of French polishing. Lac is the predecessor to shellac. Lac doesn't become shellac until you mix it with alcohol. Lac was, for most of history, harvested for its color. It's got a deep red, orangey color that was um, very sought after and very popular and used in lots and lots of things. And for most of history, it was used for its dyes. It didn't actually start becoming a finish, as we know as shellac, until the mid 1800s. Um, as a matter of course, it was used as a finish before then, but not to the degree that after the advent of aniline dyes, the lac industry, if you will, almost died away instantaneously. Suddenly, nobody wanted to use the natural lac for its color because you could produce them at much greater quantities at a much less expensive price, and the colors were controllable in the sense that you could control the color artificially with artificial dyes, rather than have to worry about how your harvest of lac. But down here, the pomegranate, that's logwood. Cooch over here, if that's how it's pronounced. I never pronounce it properly. But that is a product that is a byproduct of a let me grab it up here. Of a tree resin that we know as gum of Arabic, that we use in French polishing. When the color is bleached out of it and turns into a powder, they call it cooch or kutch. I'm not sure how they pronounce it, but it's gum of Arabic in its, the refined form for its color. Quebracho is another common dye that's used. Chestnut, all of this stuff is used in for people who like to use natural dyes for clothing or for leather goods or for wood, for that matter. I'm going to stop sharing, but that's just an example of where dyes came from. About the beginning of the 1800s, there was a gentleman by the name of Otto. I can't even pronounce his last name. He was a German man, Uwe Dorben, who was the first one to create a powdered dye from a plant. It was the indigo plant for a blue color, and he called it crystalline. That was about 1826. About 10 years later, another German scientist refined from coal tar another color that he called cyanol, which we would now call cyan. There were a bunch of other discoveries throughout the early 1800s that were mostly in Germany, that were creating all of these new synthetic colors from the reduction of oil and tar and those products combined with those natural substances that were becoming useful as dyes, and they were being able to be made synthetically to one, and successfully to one degree or another. And it wasn't until about 1850 or so, maybe a little later, that a British scientist by the name of William Perkins developed the first aniline dye that he could produce in mass quantities with any kind of consistency, to produce the colors that he wanted. And they wouldn't fade. They were easy to make. They were cheap to make. And an entire industry was created from there. And that industry continues to today. We've all heard of the German company BASF, which I don't remember what the letters stand for, but they started as a dye company in the 1800s. So, that's a little bit of the history behind it. The process by which we make dyes today haven't changed much. They're more industrial and they're in much larger quantities. But when they're making dyes or pigments in powdered form, that's the genesis of how it all began in the mid 1800s, and they still do it the same way today. So let's take a look at, if you want to switch to the other camera, let's take a look at some of these dyes. My first dye kit was this. This is actually a dye and pigment kit. So there are some of these are dyes. This yellow, this orange, this one over here, which is a medium brown. Certainly the green over here and red over here. These are all dyes. The other ones are pigments. This is like a burnt umber. This is a raw umber. This is an orange dye over here. This is an orange pigment over here. But they're all in powdered form.
I don't
This is the
cook,
first
I
one
don't
I
clean, but let
picked
me tell
up
you how I got this ring.
You were nice until you married me.
probably
and then you
about
showed your true
35 years
colors.
ago. I don't even remember where I bought it. But let me grab a spoon. You know, probably the biggest mistake I ever made was putting them in this container, because the tendency for one color to leach over to another is pretty high. But this is after 35 years of use, so you don't use a ton of this stuff. That's the first one I picked up. Over the years, I've added to my collection. I've often said that from a touch-up standpoint or from a finishing standpoint, I consider myself an all of the above finisher, because it, depending on the job, is depending on what I'm going to use to do it. So when it comes to color, I lean heavily towards doing a dry color in most cases, especially with touch-up type repairs. If I'm spraying, I will use the like the trans tint type of stuff and put drops into a finish. I will use trans tint, like liquid trans tints, to make colored shellac very often, rather than mixing dye from a powdered form into shellac for French polishing. But most of the time when I'm trying to do finish repairs, it's in the powdered form. This will go back here to, this is the Mohawk Blend All powders. They come in a variety of colors. I took the dive and ponied up for the full kit so I could have all of the colors to give myself the most options. These are pigments. Half of these are pigments and half of these are dyes. All of these are dyes. All of these are dyes, and so are these small bottles here. This is a company called J.E. Moser that produces dyes for different purposes. These are alcohol soluble dyes. They also sell a water soluble dye. They also sell an oil soluble dye. I only use an alcohol soluble dye, which, by the way, will dilute in water. So I don't know why they have a different brand for water, because I have diluted these in water, and they are water soluble. I don't quite understand the chemistry. Then, of course, if you act quickly, you can get a Luthier's Mercantile dye, aniline dye. They have a number of aniline dyes, which they have a nice kit, which for fairly inexpensive amount of money, you get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 colors or something like that, if they're still available. And I think you gotta act quickly, probably. These are from a company called Jacquard, and you'll see these very often. You can find these on Amazon.com. You'll see these. A lot of tie-dye t-shirt people use these colors. They are alcohol soluble. I don't know whether or not these are soluble in water. They probably are, because it's an aniline dye. And aniline dyes generally are soluble in both alcohol and water. If you mix them in water, you have to mix them in warm water, and you have to use a fair amount of powder to get the color you're looking for. And then, of course, if you're wiping down on a piece of wood, you're going to wind up raising the grain. And I don't use them in that fashion. I typically use them in more of a solvent-based medium. This is a company called Transol, which sells a variety of colors, and these are, of course, an aniline dye as well. Aniline is as I mentioned before, it's an organic compound. it's a carbon-based compound, so it has, I think, a series of seven. It's a 7-chain carbon chemical that is separated by hydrogen, as opposed to, say, like shellac, for example, which is an acid-based chain separated by hydrogen molecules. So the reason why I have so many different colors is because I want a variety of options whenever I'm doing color work. I like to try to start as close to where I need to be and work my way into a color touch-up, rather than always starting from red, green, blue, and yellow. I find it much quicker to get to where I'm getting from dealing with dyes in that fashion. You'll notice if you look close, if I can get closer, every single one of these bottles has a little swatch at the top of it. One of the things I found that it's curious to me is that with everybody's description, whatever product you're dealing with from whatever manufacturer, what they call cherry red is not necessarily what somebody else calls. There was one over here somewhere. Cherry red or cherry. That's cherry wood probably, but this would be considered a cherry red here. This is what this company calls cherry red. So very often when I'm working with a guitar, when I'm working with a color, it's almost impossible to tell when you're looking at the color of the powder what color you're going to wind up with. So that to me looks like brown. It's actually kind of a greenish amber, and what they call amber versus what somebody else calls amber is dramatically different things. This, for example, is what this company considers to be brown. To me, that looks very much like an orange brown, as compared to over here somewhere. There is, where is it? I saw it the other day. I just had it out the other day. Oh, here we go. This is what this company calls brown, which is almost black. It's almost Van Dyke. So, that's another reason why I like a large variety. Over the course of a career, you collect a variety of colors, and the more colors you have available to yourself, the better off you're going to be in terms of trying to get to a result when you're doing a touch-up. So that's the variety of different manufacturers that I've used from. This, I think, was originally a Balin product. In a modern time, I would think that Mohawk, when they bought Balin, used to have aniline dyes. They no longer do. They now have their kind of blend-all kit, which kind of is something that these pigments dissolve into almost anything, but they are pigments, which means that you can't see through them. So if I'm trying to create a color that I can see the grain line through as I'm doing the touch-up, I can't use these. If I'm trying to cover something that is unsightly, if somebody's filled a screw hole that is getting very difficult to cover, I can use different colors of pigments to hide them. These are translucent, these are all dyes, these are all dyes, these are all dyes, these are dyes, and these are pigments and dyes. So that's just a brief roundup of some of the things I use. We got Transol, Jakarta dyes, of course Luthier's Mercantile. J.E. Mosier has a gargantuan catalog of colors. These I'll add to as I see fit. This is probably only a fraction of the colors they have available. For some reason they decided to have a catalog that was got so many colors you could drive yourself insane trying to do it. But here's another example of why I do this. when I first get a color in, I give myself a little description on the top of the bottle and a swatch of what the color is, because what they call green could have a large variety of different qualities of green. And some of these are very useful when you're doing a touch up. There's some like guitars that have a very almost electric green color that I've used this on, that are almost blue, that kind of halfway between green and blue. I'm thinking like on some Epiphones and some Polaroid Smiths, that's come in very handy, rather than driving myself crazy starting from a basic green and then trying to dial that in from there, or trying to get there from blue, so that's one of the reasons why I really like dealing with powdered dyes, because I can start in a place that's usually harder to get to if I'm starting from say something like a mix-all pigment or the blend-all type stuff. So that's dyes. Does anybody have any questions about this stuff?
Is that your entire assortment of dyes?
That's my entire assortment.
Okay.
Do I need more?
I would just say it's interesting. What kind of concentration are you mixing them to get that swatch on the top? They look quite dark, and a lot of times powder dyes, you got to go pretty heavy to get something that dark.
Well, we're going to mix some up, and we're going to see. I'm not using very much at all. You're going to be very surprised how little powder it takes to get, say, whatever it is, say that color.
Can you also talk a little bit about compatibility? Like, is everything that you have here like both okay to go in shellac and lacquer and poly? Is there anything that you know it won't go into? Or
It's funny you should ask.
okay, well maybe I'll just let you go through your prepared thing and save my questions for the end.
That's fine. So there's a variety of things you can use aniline dyes and pigments, and I actually don't think, by the way, I haven't looked up what the base for blend-all is. I don't think it's an aniline base. I have not read their material data safety sheets, and I probably should, but to me, the blend-all powders have always been a thing among themselves that I use to achieve a certain result, which is hiding what's underneath it under a color. So if I have a crack that's got a very dark line down it, I would use a blend-all powder to achieve that, because it's a pigment. I think during one of the French polish things, we did a crack repair where I was cutting into the crack and using a pigment in the crack to try to hide that. That would have been with a pigment powder. I don't think I used blend-all for that, but I used one of the pigments from my little kit here that I'm so fond of. And I believe I probably used like an antique white pigment as opposed to a raw white pigment. But depending on the color of wood I'm doing, I might start, at an ochre yellow type of pigment, and then lighten it with a little bit of yellow if I'm cutting into, like, say, a spruce crack to try to get, to try to hide some of the dark. If somebody came along and did a super glue crack repair where they just wicked a ton of super glue into the crack, that's going to get dark super quickly. And once that's done, once that's seeped into there, you're never going to get out of that color unless you either cut it out and donate wood, or you can try a little bit of pigment to try to do that. Or if you have a cross grain crack on a peg head where it's coming across around the back of a Les Paul peg head, you can hide that cross grain crack not by covering everything and then painting it, but you can hide it by strategically using pigment to break that line and create basically a dotted line of different colors matching what your guitar colors is, or the color of the stain of the guitar. Generally speaking, the primary ways that I'm applying uh, powdered pigments is a number of ways. You can, I haven't had a whole lot of success with it. If you're doing, um, well, first of all, let's go back to the medium before we get there. But the medium which you mix it in is a pretty large variety. Pigments that are, aniline dyes that are in powder form will mix into water. I never use water as a medium for touching up guitars because you're always swelling the wood, swelling the grain, raising the grain, and it while after the water evaporates, it leaves behind the color. It's kind of difficult to deal with on a touch-up basis because you're saturating the wood in order to leave the color behind when it evaporates. And that's the primary way that you're transmitting the color when you're using water. There are a lot of people who will use water on furniture to stain a guitar with water, aniline dyes in water, but then there's a lot of sanding that goes on. There's reapplication. That's when you're in the finishing process. When we're in the touch-up world, when we're fixing guitars, we have fewer options in that sense. We don't want to get an area of a guitar wet with water because that's going to cause all sorts of other issues in our repairs. So I generally stay away from water. But there are a number of choices you have for coloring, uh, for mixing your color, your pigments, and your dyes into solutions. Some of those are just plain old shellac, which is one of my favorites. I'm a big shellac guy. Everybody knows that. We mix our own shellac from shellac flakes. Generally about a 1 pound cut or lighter gets me to where I'm being. Anything heavier than that winds up a little bit gummy. There are drawbacks and advantages to each type of thing that you would use. But there's shellac. There is this is an old can, but this is called Beckel solvent, which is, for all intent and purposes, a cousin of denatured alcohol. Denatured alcohol is something that a lot of people don't like. I don't particularly like it because it's got nasty stuff in it. It's got methanol, which is pretty nasty stuff. Methanol also contains a product, not a product, but a material that's called ether or diethyl ether, and which is hygroscopic, which means it attracts water. So that's one of the reasons why I don't ever use denatured alcohol in my shellac. I prefer to use grain alcohol, which you could also use just straight alcohol as a solvent to mix your color, and that will also help you. It will dissolve perfectly in alcohol, and it's also a great way to add color if you want to do that without shellac. There are advantages and disadvantages to each. Alcohol evaporates extremely quickly, so your color goes dry very quickly, which is an advantage in some cases. But if you're doing a lot of touch up and you're mixing your color in a palette, if every time you come back to the palette to pick up more color, you need to pick up more alcohol in order to redissolve it, that can be a little tricky in terms of maintaining a color. Shellac does a better job of staying open. It's alcohol base, but it does a little better job of its open time in terms of the color staying wet long enough for you to get on the guitar. Beckel solvent is a great alcohol. If you can't get like grain alcohol where you are, you can probably get Beckel solvent. It is similar to denatured alcohol, but it does not contain any methanol. It contains ethyl alcohol and isopropyl alcohol, and I can't remember which, butanol. So there are 3 different alcohols that are in this that still make it toxic to drink. That so puts it in the class of a denatured alcohol, but it's not as nasty as regular denatured alcohol is concerned. Then there's this. This is something that Mohawk produces that they call graining liquid. This is a lacquer-based product as opposed to shellac. So this is like a nitrocellulose-based, basically it's lacquer. It's nitrocellulose lacquer that's very heavily diluted into solvent. I presume there's a little bit of butol in here as well.
You talk a little bit about VOCs and that, like, is that you need to have a respirator? I know the alcohols you're good to go without a respirator, but is that
This you should probably be wearing a respirator if you're doing it a lot. To give you an example, when I use this stuff, I will take a mixing palette, which we'll talk about in a second, but and I'll only use that much. I don't even know if you can see that. It's just one fraction of one of those wells, and that's my medium. I only use a little bit at the bottom of the well so it stays wet. Then I'll mix colors in neighboring wells on my palette, and that just like when you use, if you're brushing nail polish on, it gets a little whiffy. You can suddenly, the room will stink up. You want to work in a well ventilated area. You want to put on a fan perhaps. If you're more comfortable putting on a respirator, you might want to do that. I don't, generally speaking, when I'm doing this, because it's such a small amount of material. Anybody who's walked into a nail salon and almost gotten knocked over from those fumes of whatever it is they're using in there, some lacquers, I presume, is you're probably in much danger of harming your health by getting your nails done at a nail salon than doing this to a guitar. But that's a lacquer-based product. Another one is this, and my buddy Joe Golden turned me on to this. This is very cool stuff as well. This is a lacquer-based product that Mohawk makes that they call 2-minute touch-up brushing liquid. It is also a nitro-based product. It's probably very similar to this, except they have different qualities. This is a much more diluted into solvent material than this is. This is a little bit more syrupy. So if you're doing if you're kind of dialing in a color for like an amber color or a brown color that you're brushing on lacquer, this is a great product to use. It to its credit, it says 2-minute touch up, and within a couple of minutes it's dry. So I don't know what product they're using for their. I should look up the material data safety sheet to see how much solvent is in here by comparison to, say, regular lacquer. But they call it a solvent. They say 2-minute touch-up solvent. It's not a solvent, it's lacquer, but that's heavily diluted with solvents. This is what they sell as their lacquer thinner. They call it lacquer reducer. This is what your solvent would be for either of these products, or just an instrument lacquer. I also have been at time to time used this to dilute my colors as well. Just straight retarder versus the lacquer. If I don't want too much buildup, I can use that. And we're going to see examples of all of those as we mix them up. And I want to just divert very quickly and mention something as it related to last week's business talk. When we talked about productive versus non-productive hours, or what I would call revenue generating hours versus non-revenue generating hours, this is what I'm talking about. This is non-revenue generating for a shop. the playtime of figuring out what works for you, messing around with colors, trying this green instead of that green, testing things on scrap before I walk over to a customer's guitar. If I'm charging enough in my revenue generating hours to pay for my non-revenue generating hours, it's not very difficult to do this stuff. A lot of times I hear excuses saying, I don't really have the time to practice like this because I got to get guitars done. Well, if you're charging what you should be for non-revenue generating hours, messing around with colors, doing the practice time of working on scrap, working on little, pieces of wood that are just scraps to test things on, working on crash dummy guitars, spending time mixing colors into different medium to see how they work for you, trying a different color. Oh, I saw this on Amazon. Let me try to get a set of those colors. They're not too expensive, and experiment with them and see what they can add to your color palette. That's what that's all about. When I'm referring to that stuff, practice time, that's what I'm referring to. I keep a drawer full of these bad boys right next to my color bench here that I'm going to be mixing at, because this is what I use to transfer one material from one well to another. Shot glasses work great for cleaning brushes. Palettes. These are the palettes I use most of the time. There's some kind of plastic that I buy these by the cartload, so I always have one available. They're easy to clean out with whatever solvent you're mixing with. So if I'm mixing with lacquer, I can use this stuff to clean it. If I'm mixing with shellac, I can use alcohol to clean it. And once it becomes kind of too scratched up and too unclean to use anymore, because sometimes when I'm mixing a color and if I've got a brush in there that I'm working a color around with and I wind up scratching up the bottom, or if I use some kind of spatula to mix it up and I wind up scratching a number of the bottom of the wells, after a period of time they wind up not releasing the color after you're cleaning them out, and then it's time to pitch them or use them for something else. But I like these a lot. This is what I use most of the time, because most of the time I'm not getting super adventurous with color. I already know where I want to be. I'll start with somewhere that's close by, and by the time I've got to the all six wells filled, I'm dialing into my color pretty well. I can use the rest of the palette to test those colors on in between and move from well to well that way. If I'm doing a lot of color and a lot of variety of colors, I move to a bigger palette, which typically looks like this. Same as that, same material, easy to clean. If I'm really getting into the woods in terms of color, I'll go with something like this. These are all available on Amazon. I just type in mixing palette and buy a variety of stuff. This allows me to start with a whole series of colors here, mix them up as I move forward, and dial in the color I'm looking for. Usually I wind up somewhere up here with the color I'm looking for. This, I just wanted to share, is effing cool. I found this on Amazon quite a while back. This is just the same type of mixing palette that opens up to here, except when you do this and you close it and snap it shut, it's airtight, which means if I mix a liquid into here, into any of these wells, and I'm mixing color here, and I have, say, shellac in a bunch of these wells, and I'm mixing a bunch of other colors. If I snap this shut with the inner lid on and close it, or if I'm using lacquer, or if I'm using shellac, or if I'm using alcohol, and using whatever, I snap this shut, it'll stay liquid, because now there's no air causing my medium to dry. So if I need to come back later and do more work, this will be a nice feature of being able to continue my work without having to start with the colors all over again. I'll often open this up and find that the wells are still wet Maybe not the colors over here, but I can re-dissolve those pretty quickly. So those are a bunch of the different kind of palettes that I use for mixing color. Let's try, maybe if we come down here. Is that close enough, you think?
It looks good on my end.
Any questions so far about any of these materials?
Doug, do you ever use glass or a see-through piece of perspex or something to try and color match?
Well,
Like
I do. I use microscope slides to mix my color on. This, when I'm working on a guitar, when I'm mixing color, I'll keep a microscope slide nearby. And so if let me grab something here. If we get to actually putting stuff on a guitar, we'll see. But if I'm working here, I'll put my microscope slide there, and I'll be able to test my color just by sliding it over and looking that way. It also, this particular brand also comes with a white base on it, so if I wanted to compare this color to the color that's on white, I can do that. This is from Globe. The caution I will give you about microscope slides is that you gotta buy the right ones. When we buy microscope slides that are the cheap ones, you can even see it from the end of the glass. They're green on the side of the glass, which actually means that they're green. They've got a green hue to them. I don't know if Zoom is going to pick this up, but you know, if we look at this against white, that's green. This is clear. This will ruin your day because what you think you have as a color is not the color once you put it on whatever you're putting it on, because whatever you're mixing onto this, you're starting off with a green hue, so you're going to wind up going a little bit too red to get where you think you need to be if you're on green already. That's why I like the white. Where's the brand of this? These are this Globe Diamond White Glass microscope slides. They're a little bit more expensive, but they're worth it.
Did we put those on the Amazon
Yeah, I
affiliate?
think yeah, we can. I don't know if we did.
Okay.
I think
we'll make sure to do that afterwards. There'll be a link to these afterwards.
That's where I got them. So
Yes.
this stuff, this will last you a lifetime because in this form, they're, unless you step on them, they're, after you put color on them, you can just clean them off with whatever solvent you're using. So they're a great resource for being able to mix a color on, check it against whatever you're, you know, and then do this kind of thing to see if your color is right. It's I picked that up as a trick, you know, decades ago, and it served me very, very well.
Yeah, they're great. I'll get some of them. Thanks.
If you have a bunch of green microscope slides and you know you're sad that you now own them, a great thing to do is use them instead of a razor blade as a scraper. So if you take, you know, if you do the Frank Ford trick of putting tape on the edge of your razor blades to raise it above your above whatever it is you're scraping, you know, if you're scraping level, if you do this to a microscope slide that you can't use anymore because it's green, that will cut wonderfully if you're trying to scrape a you know, scrape a drop fill level. So those are what those are relegated to in my shop now. So that's the microscope slides. So let's look at a variety of things. Because what I want to do here is let's look at we have graining liquid. Let's kind of do the empirical method here. We have graining liquid that I'm going to put here. Now I am going to use a different pipette for each material because I don't want to transfer one part material to another. Now, if you notice with the graining liquid, if I go back to that, it's pretty watery. So that's got a lot of solvent in it. If we move over here to the 2-minute touch-up, by comparison, that's pretty syrupy. I don't know if you can see that. That's got a lot of kind of body to it. Let me see if I can get something to... It's also a little bit yellow. I don't know if that's coming through. But you can see how thick that stuff is. It's a little bit more like molasses. It hangs on pretty well to the spatula. So it's a good material. It's a great material, but it doesn't give you many chances to dial in a color because it's so thick. But it is a wonderful material for doing touch-up, especially if I have, say, something like this that maybe I can get to the color pretty quickly. You can drop fill in a cavity like that, and if you've got the right color, it'll fill like a drop fill with lacquer, because it is lacquer. But you know, when you've got heavy lacquer that you're using, plus if you leave it out for a little while, it'll thicken up just like all lacquer will. So it's a nice material to dissolve color into, but it is a lot thicker than this stuff. I have a feeling this and this are probably very close to being the same product, but this is, the graining liquid is much more diluted into solvent, which to me makes it a little bit better choice for just doing raw color work. Then of course we have my favorite, which is shellac. Let me grab a pipette. So shellac, I'll put in the well over here. And right off the bat, you can see shellac has a little bit of a yellow hue to it compared to, say, the graining liquid. So in some senses, the graining liquid might wind up being a better choice if you want to start perfectly clear. I don't mind the yellowness of shellac, because very often we're dealing with old instruments, so that's kind of getting us to an aged hue quicker, no matter what color we put in there. Plus, if I look at shellac on a white palette, if I look at shellac, well, that brush is dirty. That was good. Let me try to get one that's clean. So if I brush this onto a white piece of paper, that's virtually clear. Shellac only looks yellowish when you have a lot of it in a cup.
Doug?
Yeah.
So other than the shellac being slightly yellow, what's the advantage to using that as a base for your dye as opposed to just...
What I like about shellac, primarily because I do a ton of French polishing, so I will very often, when I'm using color in French polish, I will be brushing on, I'll be in the process of French polishing an area, and then I will brush on with one hand, and then French polish right over my color, and then brush on, and this way I can work a color in with, you know, if we were to just look here, if I'm working French polishing and then I work in and then I'm trying to hide some crack or something like that, or drawing grain lines or what have you, then I can French polish right over it and then do that. As long as I'm using a lubricant on my French polishing pad, I won't be pulling up color to any real degree. And of course, if I'm doing that, shellac has to be my delivery of choice because I'm French polishing. I couldn't use either of these because the drying time would be significantly more. Shellac dries faster than either of these two products. So if I'm mixing color into solution in shellac versus either of these lacquer products, this is going to dry quicker. Plus, I get to reapplying quicker. I've always liked shellac for that purpose, that it gets dry very quickly. I can recoat it. I can pull it off very quickly. If I'm dealing with lacquer, there's less opportunities to redo your work. If I get a color that I'm really not liking and I say, okay, this is going south on me, I can take a French polishing pad, douse it with a little bit of alcohol, and swipe off all the color that I've just put on there without destroying the finish underneath to any great degree. Whereas with lacquer products, you got to be sure about your color. They offer less kind of redo time, so to speak. So there are, like I said, there are advantages to either and disadvantages to all, in the sense that, you know, lacquer products, very often you end up brushing on a color, and if you say to yourself, that's almost it, just wiping that stuff off is troublesome in terms of the result. Now you have to wait for it to dry, even if it is, say, 2 minutes or so, or it takes longer for this to actually set up and become hard. Graining liquid dries quicker. If you're doing the kind of touch-up work where you're just using alcohol, and we can do that over here where we can look at color just in alcohol. Oh, and also, by the way, whenever I'm dealing with colors and alcohol or colors and solvents, in this case over here, I'm going to be using alcohol. For these two over here, I'm going to be using the lacquer thinner. I always use 2 cups, one for my dirty brush, and then after I clean off my dirty brush, one for my clean brush to make sure that there's nothing left behind. That's always just good hygiene when it comes to doing color. There's nothing more demoralizing than not realizing that your color was not completely out of your brush before you moved to the next stage of your touch-up, whatever it is you're doing, if you're going from one color to the next. But here, let's use alcohol over in this well over here. And of course, alcohol is perfectly clear. So the thing I want to do now is I'll move these back so I know which is which here. Get the cover on all of these things. I do want to have some lacquer thinner in a cup so I can clean my brush. Just a tiny bit there. And then another one for my clean brush. A good stack of paper towels nearby lets you clean your brushes a whole lot easier. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to grab, let's grab all right, Ian, pick a color.
Let's take a look at that that grain, the one. Yeah, I haven't seen any of these dyes before, so the is it Moser?
Oh,
Moser?
moss green. You
So
wanna use-
not. Yeah, let's go moss green.
Okay, so we're gonna go with a green here. We're gonna go with a green here. We're gonna go with a green. I don't have a green there. So let's pick something else.
You want to go?
I want to pick something that we have the same color for each set of dyes here. I don't have a green
Oh.
small one. I have orange, I have yellow, I have brown, I have purple, I
Let's
have
go with yellow. I think yellow comes up so much, and having a wide variety of yellows is pretty key to,
yeah.
you know, like touching up binding, or it's a
So let's
good
look at
practical color.
yellow, yellow, yellow. This is ochre yellow, also canary yellow, and then I have yellow over in my thing here. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at.
Can I interject something about yellow?
I guess.
One of the things I'd say about yellow is, and something that took me a long time to figure out, was if your yellow like looks orange in concentrate, it's got red in it. And if you're constantly dealing with red ambush, you might look at where you're working on something, and all of a sudden you're like, son of a gun, that's too red. A lot of times the red from your yellow can be enough to tilt a project over into the red zone a little too far. So getting those really neutral yellows is pretty key. Sorry.
So we got one. That's fine. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different yellows we can look at. I don't know if we'll look at all 6, but then also got yellow back here over here. There is a yellow pigment and also what they call golden yellow dye, which we're going to find out. You know, there is no uniform thing is known as yellow. So the way I normally use these colors is as follows. I would take, let's start with a dye instead of the pigments. I would start with a dye, whichever one it is. Let's start with the Jakarta. And when I'm mixing it, I don't keep returning my brush to my material or to my finish, because I don't want to continue to contaminate this every time I reach over. So my solvent, whichever medium I'm using, I will use my appropriate pipette to move that material over. And what I do is I grab a small amount of material, dry, just on the brush, and I drop it in the well. That's all we need right there. There's not a lot of it. We can grab more if we need to. Then a drop of my finish onto my color, and I work that in, just like that. Whoop, let me get my hand out of the way. Drop that in like that. Now once I've got a wet brush, I can come back and pick up more color and make it deeper if I want to. This is a pretty lemony yellow, not a whole lot of orange in it. You know, you can see what the color looks like. You know, so that's somewhere I would be starting. If I was starting there, working on, say, a butterscotch blonde, I might start there. Then clean my brush. I want to work my brush off on a paper towel. Then go to my clean brush well and clean it again. So this way I'm depositing all of the color here, and I'm cleaning my brush here, and that's that color. You can see it's not all. I've got a small speck in there that's still not dissolved yet. but that's the color. Now let's look at, make sure I put covers back on. Let's look at what they call lemon yellow. And I'm going to pick up, I get a clean brush now. I'm going to pick up dry powder, drop just a touch of it at the bottom of the well, transfer my finish to my well. You call that yellow?
Only probably very dilute.
Yeah, if you were going to get very dilute with it, but even then,
Pretty red.
it's pretty orange.
Yeah.
I would actually consider that a great candidate for amber. If I was doing some amber touch up, I might go to this yellow. This is one of the reasons why I like a huge variety of colors, because yellow is not yellow, is not yellow, is not yellow. This is what they call, I haven't seen a lemon that color,
Uh-huh.
but that's what they call lemon yellow. Let's take a look over at canary yellow. Let me make sure.
I feel bad now for talking about the red and your yellow. You were going to get there. I kind of jumped on that.
That's all right. So now we've got this yellow where I'm taking, and you can see how 1 cup of these or 1 container of these would last you a lifetime of touch-up. That is dry. Let me put some finish over here. How's that for yellow?
To me, it looks maybe a little green.
Yeah, it does. Absolutely. They call that canary. So what it says on a bottle for any given manufacturer of these colors almost means nothing, which is why I do this. And you can see that's green, kind of like that is. This is very pale yellow, kind of like that is. And this almost looks orange, like that. This is a little diluted, and plus it's on white. It's not down at the bottom. There's there's a lot of material here, so we're seeing the benefit of it through a fairly thick prism. Oh, where's my glass? So if I grabbed, let me clean my brush. If I grab this and then painted it on here, you get an idea of what you're looking at, like that. That's pretty deep amber from my perspective. So this would be a good candidate if I'm trying to do, say, an amber touch-up on a Gibson guitar in the transitional color, even though the bottle says yellow. So those are a few examples of, let me do this. It's starting to get too dirty.
But for anybody curious, the trans tint lemon yellow used to be really pretty red too, and I think the last few bottles I've seen of it were pretty right on. But it seems like they're maybe more dilute too, so maybe it's harder to tell.
Let me see here. Oh, there it is. I grabbed the wrong bottle.
Michael, what's your rack of colorants at Elderly like? You got like a robust like everything, a little bit of everything dating back to 1972, or like most
Uh,
repair shops?
You do me a
no,
favor?
there's some random old weird stuff around. We have a lot of we have some of those blendalls.
Yeah,
Mostly we use Transtent,
yeah.
a lot of stuff.
Sorry, Doug. I was trying to.
It's fine. So here we've got this Transol, this company, whatever, wherever they're from. We've got their what they call yellow.
Where I've never seen that before. Where's that from?
I found this on Amazon.
Really? You know, I just did a search for is that aniline or is it just powdered dye?
This is aniline.
Did it come in a set?
These came in little bags. Now you can see
Uh,
what they call this yellow.
is your other one that's the Jacquard basic dye set? Is that right?
This one is the Jacquard basic dye set.
Oh,
Yeah,
cool. I've never seen that one before.
yeah. This one, but from
Um,
Transol, you can see what this looks like.
that's
That's not yellow.
that's pert near brown.
It's a very deep amber, almost brown, which actually I love. This, when I found this, I fell in love with it because if we go over here and we look at what they call their golden yellow dye here from my old kit that I've never been able to replace. That's remarkably similar to this.
Huh.
So I was super happy when I found this sucker right here, because as my kit gets more and more dwindled, I was worried about not having certain colors. This color has gotten me out of more jams than I can possibly count, because that amber color inside on the transitional part of a sunburst that you're trying to get between the dark and the light. Certainly amber colors on old shade Martin guitars, and the
Mhm.
shellac Martins, that orangey shellac color, of being able to get that color and even maybe a little lighter is
Doug,
a
really quick, can you name the small bottle dyes again? Trans
these are called Transol. Now these
Transol.
I transferred them to bottles. They come very frustratingly in a bag.
Oh yeah,
They come in like 5 or 6 bags that you then have to transfer. I think they I don't know what
yeah, I see that here.
yeah, but it's a great set of colors. Like I said, this yellow, even though it's not yellow like we would really want it to, this is the
Mhm.
only one, to my eyes, that's actually a great yellow.
Yeah.
You know, to start with, this canary's okay, and if you use it, if you dilute it well enough, you'll get a decent canary yellow. But it's a lot greener than I would normally use. But that color there would really work well. Now I'm transferring colors, so forgive me. But that color canary, what they call canary, would be really good on certain guitars where I'm dealing with that kind of yellowish, kind of green yellow binding.
Mm-hmm.
It's not really yellow, that when you go to try to put yellow on it, it looks like a banana
Uh-huh.
compared to the green binding that's there. I'll very often use that color and then just French polish over it, to get where I'm getting. So that as you get to know your colors, you find out, oh, that's good for this. This is good for that. And that's why I'm a huge fan of having lots of different variety of color. So let's look at the last bit of color. And this is, so far, this is just in this, the graining liquid. So this is a lacquer base that these are are dissolving into. Let's look at let's look at ochre yellow from the Blendall. Now this is a pigment. This is not a dye. So let me put it right into, since there's no room left, I'm going to put it right into the graining liquid that's left in this the original well that we started in. And I'll put that in there. And it just takes a little bit of powder and you get mustard.
That's
Right.
actually looking. I don't know if it's the camera, but I know that particular powder, and I think in real life it's not as yellow as that. That looks very yellow right there.
It does look very yellow. It's not. It's almost a sand color.
Yeah.
You know, so if I look at that on here, it's
I will say too, if you have any of the StuMac color tone pigments before Jeff stops supplying with them, hold on to those because they are superior to the Mohawk pigments in a big way.
Now what you will notice is that a dye, translucent, a pigment is not. So this might be where I want to start with this color here, maybe a little bit more diluted if I'm looking to hide that dark line, cut into that dark line and hide some of that stuff, or if I want to interrupt that cross grain crack. And if that's the color I'm looking for, I would go a little bit lighter than that. And I might actually go a little bit lighter than that, a little bit browner than that, if I was trying to, replicate spruce in a particular set of circumstances. But that's the graining liquid. So let's quickly move on. Let me clean my brush and get another palette going. Get rid of these. Let me just turn these over. This was covering this. Let's make sure we cover that. Oh, and before we go any further, applying Blendall. I know there's a kind of a methodology of applying Blendall where you scoop it up with your finger or, grab it on a Q-tip and you kind of pat it on dry. I don't do a lot of that because for my eyes, it has a tendency, and whenever you're dealing with color like this, once you get your color where you want to lock it in. So you're either going to spray very lightly over it with a very mist coat of lacquer, or you can, like I was trying to describe before with French polish, you can French polish over it. Or if you're going to give it a quick spritz of, say Zinsser shellac or something like that to lock in your color and protect it from whatever comes above it. When I see for the lack of a better description, the Mohawk powders patted on to a color or to a guitar, the only time I personally consider that a viable method is if I'm trying to hide something forever underneath this tarp. I'm thinking about the great job that Nikki did on that carbon fiber thing, where if you keep going with a particular color or a particular series of colors, this will create an opaque, basically a shield or a tarp over whatever you're trying to hide. And if you put enough there and then, of course, spritz some lacquer or something on it and then continue that process, you'll wind up covering what you're trying to hide. But for my purposes, I've never had any luck with this because to me, the end result looks too blotchy to my eyes. And then I wind up with an opaque canvas that now I have to paint grain lines on and do that type of thing. For my purposes, if I can grab a brush, in fact, and show you here, especially since we have kind of a little bit of a yellow here. I didn't prepare this for any kind of, I don't know, can you see that dark ding there?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I didn't prepare this. I didn't sand it. I didn't do anything for it. So forgive the crude work. But, you know, if I'm taking an opaque and I'm I need a little bit more of the powder in there. Might want to switch to a smaller brush. You can see what's happening is I'm starting to get a cover to what's underneath it, hiding the dark part of that.
Doug, when you do that, you know, more for real instead of just improvising it on camera, that being a ding with, let's say, sharp edges of the finish, do you come in with, you know, 400 or 600 and try and cut those edges off, so to
Sure.
speak?
Yeah, this somebody filled this ding at some point. This was a ding repair that somebody must have done, you know. But yeah, I would prep the area first, you know. But I would, you know, come in with a
Make it more of a bowl. Than
yeah.
like
I would normally be using a much smaller brush. This is just the brush I was using to mix the stuff here, but just as an example, you know, coming in very small spots to try to break up. And I'm typically drawing in opaque stuff that's like that. I don't know if that's in the camera or not. You know, so I'm getting lighter than the dark area that was there. I would use a very tiny brush. Sometimes I even come in with like a dental tool. I'll pick up some color with a dental tool, and I'll be just putting it on that way to give myself a kind of little tapestry of opaque areas to. Oh, I picked up some green in the process. There might have been some green on there already from a job I just recently did.
Green is the complementary color of red, by the way.
Yes. So, you know, here it's just little dabs. And then, like I said, normally I'd be using a much smaller brush to try to make that area less conspicuous. Once I get to kind of where I want, then it's lighter already. I can, you know, give it a quick spray over the top of it and then hide it a little bit more. You know, that's what I would normally use the pigments for, because I'm trying to hide that blotch before I put a little bit more color over the top of it and then before I spray. So it's a process of kind of massaging this ding that I'm trying to fix in a certain direction. And you can even see there that it's a lot lighter. It's not under anything. Let me grab some naphtha.
Doug, you ever go into the city and go down to Kremer Pigments?
I have not. I probably should.
We maybe we make a field trip of that one of these days. So I want to go in there. I don't know nothing. I mean, it's fancy art stuff, but
Yeah, a lot of the art pigments the fancy stuff has a tendency to be all of those natural pigments.
Yeah.
So if you want to start messing around with, you know, plant dyes and stuff like that, some of the pigments are useful. So you can see that that's very opaque and very light to give myself a base to start putting color on top of that. So when I'm using pigments to hide stuff, I really am being very judicious with it. The notion of coming in here and doing that in an entire area until it all looks like just a blanket of yellow, to me makes more work than I want to use it for.
What
I
if
would
you had a
use-
smaller, what if you had a smaller finger?
Well, if let me get some finish solvent here. So, but that dark spot gets pretty light pretty quickly if I'm using a pigment. See if we can do this without picking up any of the green stuff from over here.
Your camera's doing that crazy 60s strawberry alarm clock zoom in. Pop, 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 pop.
Oh, I might start with a little bit. That's not a bad color. I might darken that off a little bit to start. But I would, like I said before, I would use a much smaller brush and make it much more of a stipple than anything else, trying to get an area that,
When Joe Glazer was giving his talk about doing the carbon fiber at Northwoods, he talked about going big, because one of the things, do you mind if I just kind of interject,
yeah,
Doug?
go ahead.
One of the things that happens when you block like this is you're blocking the chatoyance of the wood, and even if you just have subtle chatoyance in the wood,
Mhm.
your pigments are going to look the same, and as you roll the neck around, you're going to see like the same pigment. Meanwhile, the guitar wood is changing apparent color on the angle
Right. Mhm.
around it, and so like it seemed like Glazer's take on it was just to make the whole thing pigment. So, which is
Well,
certainly an option.
it is
And
certainly an approach. For my purposes, I want to get out of the finishing room as quickly as possible with as much dignity intact as I can.
oh, you like that dignity stuff, huh? All right.
So here, if I would probably mix the color a little bit more like what's going on over here, but just as the raw color, that's starting to make that deep ding much less noticeable. Now I'd be able to bring some of this brown in. I would seal it, and then I would go with the dye over the top of it to give myself the translucency that I'm looking for, that the rest of this looks like up here. But that's an example of where a pigment would be more appropriate to use than a dye. But let's jump to, but that's dealing with just the graining liquid, which is a lacquer product. You can see as I tilt that up, it's all still liquid. So that stuff stays open pretty well. Let's move to here. I'm going to close this. Let's pick another color since we're all.
Well, why don't we stick with the primaries and just move value wise into red, if you
Okay.
want.
Yeah, let me just grab a bunch of reds. Red. We have Blendall's red. There is, in the Mosier, I have cherry red and red mahogany. We'll see what those look like. But we've got that red, Blendall red, this red, that red, and I got a red dye, a medium red dye up here. This may very well wind up being very much like this medium red dye. I have found that these transols, for some reason, match the colors I was pretty used to. pretty used to in my old color set. Let me just put another finger cut on. So let's try some reds. Let me get a fresh brush that doesn't have yellow in it. Sure.
I'm really liking that Jacquard has those dyes. I don't remember them having those. Are those relatively new or?
I think they've been around for a long time. I know, I remembered, I can't remember who I mentioned it to, but somebody had, it may have been Kate Katz, mentioned that she used them for
tie
tie-dye.
dye.
Yeah.
By the way, James Rodman was busting
Well,
out
I'm-
with the Rit dye, which like Rit dye was like kind of lame tie stuff when I was a kid, but it looks like their dye game has been taken up a notch.
I think I think the expectations of people who wear tie-dye or do tie-dye
It's gone
is
up.
gone up probably too.
Yeah.
Let me give myself some more reducer here.
Doug, what's the Mohawk Blendall? What was the yellow and what's the red called? Just I don't have either of those primary colors.
I think that
The Blendall is Blendall's red is just Blendall powder stain red.
yeah. I think
It's red.
that yellow was like a yellow ochre or something, was it?
Yellow, yeah, the yellow was the one we chose. They have two of them. They had ochre yellow, which I think was the one we used,
Yeah.
and
And
they
then
have
canary.
canary yellow.
Okay.
What one thing about using can I interject again on the Blendall stuff and
Go ahead.
the fingering it on thing?
Yeah.
One thing that you got to be aware of in the Blendall, it seems some of those pigments like to break into their constituents in solution, and I think the fingering it on is maybe to prevent that. I know I think it was the brown or something. I'd put it into some lacquer to either brush it on or spray it on, and then I'd look and there'd be like little specks of stuff that were not brown, and then the solution was also not super brown anymore either. And I think it was just like it can't, for whatever reason, however they make it, like it's not, some of the colors don't handle being in solution well, but I think they do handle being powdered over and then misted over a little bit better. But I think that's why they do that. But be more of a Jeff Jewett question.
You mean the constituents in the color? So if you have like a green that's a mixture of blue and yellow,
Yeah.
it breaks up into the blue and yellow. I have
Yeah.
seen that with some colors.
Doesn't do them with all of them, but
And
yeah.
sometimes I think that also depends on the solution that you're mixing it into.
Yeah.
So very often, if your vehicle, so to speak, is not helping you out that way, then switching to another solution
Yeah.
would sometimes be the answer for me, because I have seen that from time to time. Let me find a pipette that I can use for the lacquer stuff here. This is the 2-minute touch-up, and you're going to see just a
But
couple.
by the way, if anybody here is smarter than me or Doug, feel free to chime in on any of this stuff.
Absolutely.
Well, smarter than me.
So here,
Isn't that interesting?
what they're calling red, and I can once my brush is wet, I can come in and pick up more. This is what they're calling red.
So you mind if I tell you what that looks like to me?
Yep,
Looks like purple
it does.
or magenta, maybe.
It could be a magenta. It is certainly a deep magenta. That color will come in handy for some applications, for some guitars. I'm thinking, those mid '80s very deep red, like West Montgomery guitars that had that almost magenta red, or that, I guess we would
Yeah,
call it cherry. That's that almost purple color that would work
yeah,
wonderful.
yeah,
But it wouldn't necessarily be a red that I would grab for if I was working on a fire engine red Strat.
yeah.
But
You
that's
can't get there from here.
exactly. So that's another reason why I've always been a big fan of developing a collection of these. If I only had 3 or 4 jars to choose from, like a red, a yellow, a green, a blue, a brown.
Well, can I hold forth just a little bit longer on this subject?
Sure.
I mean, primary colors don't have other primary colors in them, and that purple look it means it has blue in it somehow, some way. It's
Right.
got blue in it. And if you think if you think red ambush is pernicious, like blue ambush, if you're going for red and you've got even just like little bits of blue in there, like it will really you'll get way darker. The value blue is such a dark color that your value will just go through the roof and you'll get dark way faster. So once again, if your red is like a primary color and you've got a second primary color intermixed into it,
Mm-hmm.
you just you can't get there from here. Like there's no, because you can't mix a secondary color into it, because every second, like if you were to mix your complementary color, which I believe would be probably what, orange or something for blue,
Right.
but you would just be, because blue is a component in there, you would just be making brown, because
Right.
you've already
Can I
got
jump
plenty.
in, can I jump in for a second here?
Yes, sir.
I just walked back, unless you mentioned it. I think way back when, Doug, remember when we were playing around with, and you were doing something in the shop with the glue boost blue,
Mm-hmm.
and it was coming back almost a purple. It would
Yes.
just come back. You were getting that.
Now that looks, sorry. Yeah, the purple that's looking dark for sure, but
It's looking dark, but it looks much more red. This is more like a wine red, a little bit more. But this is something that I would consider, for example, if I can reach it. Let me move this out of the way. So if I were doing, my Gibson cherry red, I would reach for this one in a heartbeat, because that would give me my red that I was looking for, the kind of wine ready. I don't know if you can see that's coming through.
There you go.
Yeah. So that's a nice kind
None
of
of
match to that wine red.
none of what you got so far is going to touch up that Total Vice docking station, though. Look at that thing.
No, not that. But
That's just red. That's like if you asked a little kid what his favorite color was and he said red, that would be
yes,
that red.
yeah. I think Jeff, when he was young, probably couldn't decide whether his favorite color was blue or red,
Uh-huh.
because everything he makes is either blue or red.
Strong colors.
Yes, so that is the Transol. If we look at what I've always used, which was a red back here, let me make sure I'm clean. Yep. This is the red that I had been always familiar with.
Is that a pigment or a dye one that you grabbed, brother?
This is a dye.
Thank you.
This is your old kit. Well, did you say who the manufacturer of that kit was?
If my memory serve, it was Balin.
Yeah.
They
By
had,
the way, Buzzy has like an ancient Blendall kit, and those colors are straight up different.
yeah,
Crazy different. Like, matter of fact, I will pay money. There's a color in there called transparent mahogany that will like one hitter quitter, like Gibson magenta, like 30s double, like LG double O or L double O guitars. Like, it's just dead ringer for it.
so if I now look over at Let me make sure this is clean.
Mike, are you in the shop right now or are you at home?
I'm at home.
Okay.
So if I'm looking at what Mosier calls cherry red,
Uh-huh.
I'm going to drop that here.
Can't imagine that's going to get red. Ah,
Deep. That looks like
yep.
that looks like burgundy. That looks like
Boy, actually, if you might as well just call that blue and then say it's got blue with some red in it. It's so
yeah. So if we're looking at on
boy, I'd be super upset if I'd yeah,
definitely a purple.
yeah. Oh boy.
Yeah. So there's a wide variety of color that come under the red category, obviously. That's what they call natural cherry red. That doesn't look cherry to me.
Yeah.
This looks closer to cherry to me.
It does, which one was that? That was the Transol?
That was the Mosier.
Oh, okay. No. The one that you think does look like cherry. Is that the
Uh,
Transol?
the one, yeah, Transol is very close to this. Was the original
Yeah.
powders from. Let me get this clean. I might switch to another brush because I got a lot of red kind of impregnating the brush here. Yeah, let me switch to another brush.
The thing that I would add is if you're it is good to have a lot of different colors because some of those will just absolutely be the right thing for the right circumstances. But if you're just starting out, get you a collection of as close to the primaries as you can, just so that
Oh,
you can
true. Yeah.
so you can mix to if you don't have the ability to buy a bunch of stuff, just try to get really accurate primaries.
This is what Mosier is calling red mahogany.
Huh. Maybe that red mahogany um
It's very brown.
that may come from furniture
Yes, probably.
nomenclature.
Exactly.
That may have been something that they used at one point for you're maybe figuring that the red of the mahogany is going to provide you a
Probably.
lot of the red.
Yeah. Now let's take a peek at.
I think we should do this more often. We'll get everybody to do a survey of their colorants. This is good.
Well, it gives you an idea of what you can achieve with different colors, and like I said, it's the whole having a wide enough palette so I can get in the finishing room, and that's another reason why I do this with the tops of the jars,
Mm-hmm.
because you can easily hold this up to a guitar and say, that's closer than that is, or this is closer than this is. This red mahogany being that kind of color there,
Mm-hmm.
on some guitars, that's your color. To me, it looks brownish, like a reddish brown.
Mm-hmm.
But on some old, I want to say, um, Guild guitars, that color would be perfect. Now let's look at Blendall. We already know what we're going to get because Blendall is opaque.
I find unless our reds are different, I find that red to be for how red it is in powder form. Like my experience with it in liquid form was always a little bit different than. Looks pretty red.
That's pretty red. You know, so that's closer to a, you know, kind of a, what do they call that? Apple red or something like that for the strats or something like that.
Yeah.
You know, if we go a little bit more, a few more coats on top of that, or just get a little bit more powder in there. That's a pretty steep red, almost fire engine red. You know, and of course, mixing colors. If you wanted to mix a little yellow into there, you'll get orange. If you mix a little white into there, it'll soften the red a little bit, or a little bit of black will bring you closer to, you know, to a wine red or a cherry red. Those are both lacquer-based mediums that we are mixing into. Now we're going to look at shellac. Pick a color you want for shellac, unless you want to stick with some of the same stuff.
Oh, okay. So wait a second. Those won't mix into shellac, or you
They
just
will.
saying that?
Yeah, no, I'm just saying,
Okay.
you know, just for the purpose of looking at other
Oh,
colors.
let's go on to blue. Do all of those have black associated with them too, or I suppose
Yeah,
it's-
I have.
let's go ahead and go into blue just keeping with the survey of the primaries.
Do you know if Mohawk do luthier discounts or, you know, wholesale discounts for us?
I think they charge more.
I'm adding up everything I want to buy from this freaking lecture, and I'm at like hundreds of dollars.
Well,
Also, I
There's a
don't know
Canadian
if you
company that I
if
use.
you-
It's Ardec. Sorry, not to interrupt.
What was that? RDEC.
Yes, ARDEC. Their pricing for Mohawk products are pretty reasonable. I'm not sure.
you can get some stuff from off of Amazon, but it's like it's really like pulling teeth to search for Mohawk stuff on there because they always want to hide it behind a bunch of other stuff. But if you order directly from Mohawk too, you need to put together $100 minimum order. So
well, Dave Stouty was telling me the other day. Well, he was on the Loof along, and the Mohawk rep showed up to his shop
to do what?
just to hang out and have a look
Yeah.
at a bunch of Mohawk products and see if he needed anything. I was like, how did you get somebody to come to your house?
Yeah. We had a guy come to Gruens every once in a while, and he was as hard to pin down on what did what as reading their descriptions in there on the website. I was just like, so what is this? What is this? You know, supposed to be used for? He's like, oh, I don't know. Probably not guitars. You know, like
Well,
very
Dave had
frustrating.
mentioned something about the fact that since he had a relationship with the local sales rep
Mhm.
and being a business, he was able to get, you know, business pricing by
Oh,
comparison to what you would get just buying it retail on the website.
that's cool.
So you know,
I'd love to get I'd love to get them to come on and just talk about their products so that you have a fighting chance of knowing whether or not it was useful for different circumstances. Like what, you know, like they've got like 5 different kinds of you know, ultra flow, and then the description is great for flowing, you know, like really? All right. It does say ultra.
well, there's a lot of weirdness with their product line in that sense that,
Yeah.
you know,
And
almost.
then they change the chemistry of everything every year. And don't bother to tell you.
Let me wipe out.
Now, let's get the Mohawk rep on here. I want to talk to him.
Let's wipe this out. I got red in there.
One thing I've noticed, back to the pigments that want to separate, I've also noticed that if you're blending a bunch of different pigments together to make a color, that there'll be different weights. So they'll settle differently in there.
They
I mean,
will, yeah.
and especially if you're trying to do like a cheap one, a quick one, like with an epoxy fill, on a cheap guitar, you got a chunk that you need to fill in or something, like on a broken peg head. And that can, as if you don't use a fast enough setting epoxy, that'll mess it up because your color will just stratify. It's weird.
Yeah, that's a real bummer.
Here's here's a blue.
Bye, Jerry.
It's not a very vibrant blue. That's in shellac.
But can I interject one more time on Mike's thing?
Sure, go ahead.
I did talk to Jeff about that, and he said Mohawk blend all powders are virtually useless for mixing because of that, and for a number of other reasons. And going back to those color tone pigments, so those are like pretty much the only thing that he thinks you should, that are really geared towards being able to mix. And one of the reasons why he was specific about getting those into StuMac. So I'm trying to figure out how to get a hold of him to make little touch-up kits for everybody, but we'll see if that's a possibility.
Here's a blue that is the aniline dye for Mohawk. Not for Mohawk, for
Oh
Luther's.
yeah, Luthier's Merc. So will the Luthier's Merc only go into shellac, or?
No, it'll go into whatever.
Okay.
Everything that we've been looking at so far will go into
Did we
every
see
one of these.
did we see the Luthier's Merc in red? I can't remember.
I don't know if we did that in red.
Yeah, it's all right.
It's a very vibrant red. I should have pulled that one. That to me,
Whoa.
yeah, that looks purple. You can see right off the bat, this looks very purple. That looks very indigo. This looks almost like a charcoal blue.
Yeah.
So the variety of colors you get from one to another is tremendous. So here we're going to try the Transol blue.
Trevor Healy says he's got a business tax ID number, and he can get a discount from Mohawk, maybe.
He could or
Yeah.
couldn't.
Oh wait, hold on. Let me see. Maybe I didn't read it right.
If you got a tax ID number, you should be able to get wholesale pricing from most anybody. So my Transol blue here is looking very close to this over here.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, how often does blue come up in what we do? It comes up occasionally.
You're working on Paul Reed Smith.
Yeah, exactly.
That is nice looking blue though. The I would say the blue for me comes up if I'm like, I've got something that's magenta and I'm trying to ease into the magenta part of it. I might want a blue to add just a little bit.
So here's our blend all.
Yeah, the main thing I was saying is just simply that if you do have a tax ID, it's 100% worth looking into anything that you want to order.
Oh,
Yeah.
sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
You get wholesale pricing on anything. Set yourself up as a dealer if you have to.
Yeah. I don't know if I've ever tried with Mohawk because I usually am only buying instrument lacquer or, the occasional dye in pretty small quantities. And the pricing on Amazon is really good. It's like $22 for a quart, so it's reasonable.
So this is glad I put the cover back on. That is Mohawk's Blend All Blue.
Wow, that is really
Different.
it's not going to opaque as fast as I would have guessed.
No, it's not. And some of the Blend All pigments are funky that way. It'll dry opaque, especially like as it is there. Or if I even put that on, our glass slide here. I can mix in a little more color in, but it's staying granular. It's taking a little while to. So some of these Blend All pigments kind of act a little bit like a dye because I can see through that.
Yeah,
You know,
that's I guess I haven't used Blendall blue before.
so you can see how you can see through that potentially. You
Yeah.
know, but that's shellac. I mean, it's so even though shellac, when we look at it in this fashion, has kind of a yellowy kind of look to it,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't affect the color. That you're now you can see here. I forget which one this one. I think this was the. I forget which one this was. There might be some color contamination in this one because I may have pulled it from here, and I may have some color contamination from one of the nearby colors that's in there. It's like I said, this was not the brightest idea I ever had of putting all of those in there.
All you need is a tiny vacuum cleaner, and you can get on to.
So that's in shellac. If we go into
Question is, how many times have you tipped one of those over? And you're like, damn,
one of the bottles,
Yeah.
or one of the powder things.
one of the powdered ones.
It only takes once, and then
Only
you
takes
learn the
once.
lesson. I did when I first bought the Glue Boost powders. I learned my lesson about recovering your cap or putting
It
your
happened.
cap on as soon as you're done
Yeah.
very quickly because I knocked the red Glue Boost powder off the bench onto the floor, and it turned upside down, and everything was red for weeks.
The other thing about putting, I think on the Glue Boost ones, putting the lid on it is that stuff is such a fine particulate that it'll get airborne, almost like those
Oh,
epoxy fillers. Like you don't want the lid off of those when you're around because your chest will start getting heavy.
all right, let's pick a different color.
You want to go with black now? Want to try that?
Yeah, we can do black.
Or no, let's do a brown. Let's do a brown.
Okay, so we got
One other thing, I don't
brown.
think. Do you have the Mohawk? Is your Mohawk got a perfect brown in there?
They have burnt umber, extra dark walnut, dark red mahogany, light walnut, rust sienna, Van Dyke brown, burnt sienna, pine, cherry, medium brown walnut, brown mahogany. Oh, perfect brown. There it is.
So, according to my kind of intuition, that is supposed to be the brown that's so brown that you cannot detect a a secondary color in it. In my estimation, it's maybe a fudge red, but it would be a good comparison for your other browns to kind of like show off what the secondary colors are on it.
So, in my original color palette here, they have a dark brown dye and a medium brown dye, which is a little on the red side. Dark brown would be considered your Van Dyke. And then they have some pigments, burnt umber, raw sienna, burnt sienna, like a Mars brown pigment, a Van Dyke brown pigment. So brown is one of those colors that for some reason these companies that make these things spend a lot of time making browns, and in a variety of colors. If I looked over at the Mosier, for example, they've got deep red mahogany, which is more of a brown, cherry rosewood, which is a brown, medium red mahogany, which is a brown, yellow walnut, which is more like a green brown, and so on and so forth. But then they have something they call perfect brown as well. They call this one perfect brown. This is Blendall's perfect brown. This is just a brown. This is our brown from. Let me get another mixing brush out here. There we go. So this is into alcohol. So let's make sure I got enough alcohol.
I don't think that Blendall is going to do real well in alcohol.
Well, let's see. Let's try that. We'll try this one first since it's open. This is just a standard brown.
Ooh.
Now, to my eyes, I've used this before, and I was very pleased. But it looks
pretty red.
It looks like amber to me.
Yeah.
Look at that. You know, I'm thinking Gretsch. You know, a little bit deep on the deep side for Gretsch.
Oh yeah, dilute, that would make a great
Yeah.
amber.
But it says brown on the bottle. There's another case in point for, my tendency to want to have as large a collection of these as I can amass over time. If I see a good deal on something that I haven't used before, I say, oh, I'm going to add that to the arsenal. The Jakarta was probably the most recent thing I added to the arsenal, maybe about 3 or 4 years ago. Transol I've been using for a little while. Mosier's I've been using forever. I think I bought the full Blendall powder stain kit, the pigments, about 3 years ago. I had some old Blendall stuff that was a few bottles of it, but I didn't have the full, so I ponied up for the full kit. Like I said, this has been my go-to for as long as I can remember. I've been able to do 90% of what I need to do with this, but it's nice to have all of these different options. Because I was when I was French polishing the back of that Gibson that we did on the French polishing series for the Luth group. I used almost all of the Blendall stains to draw in, thousands of little grain lines while I was French polishing over them of a variety of different colors to give myself that tapestry of different colors of browns and greens and that kind of thing. So the Transol brown here, you thought what you had next door was super red. That's extremely red.
And probably looks like maybe just a pinch of blue too.
I think I just picked some up from over there.
Oh, okay.
I think there's some blue from the other thing that's farting around in here. There's a blue there, a little blue fleck there and there and there. I got some blue transferring over from next door. But that brown is a pretty good brown. You know, it's pretty deep. It's quite red. I need another.
My neutral brown dye is tobacco brown trans tint, which is pretty neutral, but it's got a mess of black in it, which is okay. I mean, I usually wind up needing that black in most circumstances, but
All right, what haven't we done yet? We haven't done what Luthier's Mercantile calls brown.
see some yellow there.
Yeah, it's almost green,
Yeah,
you know. But there are lots of circumstances, some of those old Gibsons,
yeah.
you know, I could see that coming in super handy. You know, that kind of brown. Now remember, this is an alcohol, so it's super wet. It's, you know, if I were doing this in shellac, if I brought some of this over into shellac, it would be a much more even color,
Yeah.
you know, but it's still kind of a greenish, kind of yellowy brown, you know. This is super concentrated here. When you're mixing into here, the takeaway is when you're mixing into just alcohol, you've got a lot of transfer of color. It's carrying a lot of color, but it's going to evaporate super quickly. This and this are already dry to the touch for the most part. You know, that I'm not able to even pick up any color on my finger practically. And I
Doug?
just put it down there. Yeah.
A question. If I noticed on your bench, the alcohol that you used there, was that Everclear, that grain alcohol?
Mm-hmm.
Now, if just as comparison to something, now I have that in my shop. I've used that before, just with the experimental stuff that you've shown me in the past. Isopropyl alcohol, 99.9%. Can you use that for?
I don't know that that's probably the best solution for an alcohol. I think if you can't get grain alcohol, you're better off going to, like, say, something like the Becol solvent,
Right.
which is ethyl alcohol. That's probably
That's all I have.
separated.
Yeah, I have denaturate. How do you call it? Denaturate.
Denatured.
Denatured. Thank you. God,
Okay.
brain fart.
Denatured
Alcohol
alcohol
that I've used with, I think was one of Dan Erline's techniques when I saw him once tint a fender neck. He
Right.
was using that.
Denatured alcohol is ethanol, which is light grain alcohol, mixed with methanol, which is a poisonous alcohol, basically.
Awesome.
If you're concerned with I'd mentioned before, I'm not a big fan of anything that contains methanol, because methanol contains ether, which is fairly hygroscopic, so it attracts water, so that you can get a fair amount of blushing, that whitish cloudiness, when you're using it. That's why if you're going to use, if you can't get yourself the grain alcohol, this stuff, which is a mixture of ethanol, butanol, and isopropyl alcohol is probably a better bet, but it's still probably 80, almost 80% ethanol.
All of
Let's see that.
What proof?
Let's see what that blendol does in the alcohol. I think this is probably going to break apart. This is my hunch.
What proof is your grain alcohol, Doug?
190.
We make
Yeah.
Italian limoncello with that also. A dozen lemons and sugar makes a very good makes a very good aperitif. FYI.
So this is blendol into the alcohol.
Is that holding together or is that getting granular? Can't tell.
It seems to be holding together pretty well,
Oh, cool.
you know. Um, that's onto paper. If I go on to, let me just grab this, even though it's the wrong color. That's not doing too bad. Let me get some more in there. So as a credit to its name, it's blending pretty well. You know, like I said, I probably am not somebody who reaches for the alcohol as my first choice for doing any kind of staining, unless I'm staining a raw piece of wood. That I'm just looking to rub alcohol onto the wood, and
Yeah.
the alcohol leaves the stain behind. You know, this way it's non-grain raising and whatnot. But you can mix a lot of this stuff into alcohol.
It's
You can see the wide variety of browns that you're getting right off the bat. You know,
I think with pigments, you do need just a Scotia binder in there, or they'll be kind of difficult to work with anyway. You'll push them around you just kind of push them around.
mm-hmm. Did we use the Luther's Mercantile Brown yet?
I think so. Was that the yellow one, I think.
Let's look at Mosier's Perfect Brown. What they call Perfect Brown. And I'm going to drop that here. What do you think?
Can I add something real quick about alcohol?
Yes,
Sure.
sir.
I actually find isopropyl alcohol really useful.
Okay.
When it does actually work with a dye that I'm trying to use. A lot of the time, I need to dye, kind of raw wood. I like the fact that it raises the grain a little bit. I can come back and sand it, and then there's a color down in the wood, but not on some of the grain. That kind of thing. It allows a subtlety at times, which I don't know. I
Cool.
find useful.
Cool.
That'll be worth checking out then. Sure.
That's a deep tip.
Well, that's so you're talking about when you've got like something like a top sanded down to raw wood that you wanna then stain to a certain color, whether it be, amber or reddish or brownish or whatever the color you're shooting for. You're talking about mixing stain into alcohol and then just wiping it on the surface and then sanding it off to get your desired intensity.
I mean, I suppose somebody could do that. I don't do that. I just mean for little tiny spot fixes and stuff.
Are you trying to like a spot fix where maybe you're trying to like give the impression of tanned wood? Like you're not trying to like give it a different color. You're just trying to give it that darker
Yeah.
look.
Yeah. As wood gets older, the grain differentiates more in its shades, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I find it works for me anyway.
Cool.
Yeah, I'd definitely be interested in giving that a shot. So that's, I mean, those are the
Bye,
different,
Alyssa.
those are the different medium that I would typically use these in. And of course, just for kicks and giggles, we looked at a variety of the colors that you can get. If we look at the dark brown over here, which I use to a great degree, I'll put that right into the alcohol. That to me gets a super tobacco brown that's typical of what we see on a guitar, you know, in especially in bursts and stuff like that. So there's, so depending on where I'm going, depending on what I'm looking for, there's a variety, if the bottle says brown, typically speaking, you have no idea what's in it or no idea what it's going to look like. And it's chances are it's not going to look anything like somebody else's brown.
Yeah.
So that's another, reason why I like to have such a, such an extensive kit. And I didn't buy all of this stuff at once. It was, as something popped up on my radar, or I felt like adding to the kit, or something that was looked interesting to me as I was searching for something else. I said, that looks good. I'll try that, and we'll see how those colors work. Some colors work great for some things and not so good for others. But you can see right there in that palette of just what's coming out of the powder, there's a tremendous amount of choices that, and then it just keeps going on from there. I mean, that's, there's, we haven't even, hit the tip of the iceberg yet. So there's a lot to be able to choose from, and having that kind of an arsenal, if you can develop it over time. I have picked up a lot of stuff over the years where you'll see somebody list, the 15 or 20, like Mosier aniline dyes on eBay that they just had in their garage and they're looking to get rid of. This stuff, any kind of aniline dye, it does not expire. It will be around forever. It can get a little bit hard if some moisture is present. It'll harden up on you. I had one that I was looking at one point. I don't remember which one it was. I thought it was one of the Mosiers. Or maybe it was this one. Yeah, the green. I opened it up and I found it like clumped up a little bit. If you come in and just chop it up, turn it back to powder, it's as useful as it was the day you bought it. So it's, even if a little bit of moisture got present, if I just churn this back into a powder, it'll be perfectly useful, and it'll give me the color that I want. So in that sense, they don't go bad. Just because they've hardened up, you can turn it back into a powder pretty quickly. Aniline, I've heard people say that they're concerned about it. Aniline is a poison to humans. So if you were going to sprinkle this stuff on your Cheerios in the morning, it probably wouldn't be a good idea. And of course, you should wear gloves. But to do it in the context of what we're doing here, there's absolutely no harm. I wouldn't stick my nose down into the bottle and take a good long sniff or anything like that. But, you can wear a mask if you want.
We should open up for questions because we're coming up on two and some change, plus people are dropping like flies, so we should probably.
Who's got questions? Anybody got questions before we wrap it up?
I do. Doug,
you want to pull that pin down?
Yeah. Hold on a second. Go ahead. Floor recognizes Mr.
I see an
Bohannon.
opportunity to say something. Doug, do you have a core, I don't know, 10 colors that you found are the most grabbed for Martins and Gibsons and, common instruments?
Well, yeah, it depends on what purpose you're what you're trying to achieve in a particular touch up. The blend all, if maybe if we go back to the other thing, the blend all Van Dyke Brown, I don't know if you want to, or maybe I can just do it this way. The blend all Van Dyke Brown is a really good brown. Most of the browns are pretty good. It depends on how many you want to get of those.
Yeah, that's why I was asking, because there's a lot of different shades of brown, the blend all.
There's a lot of different shades of brown in Blendall. The
Yeah.
Van Dyke brown, brown mahogany, and then the siennas, raw sienna and burnt sienna are probably good, or raw umber. You know, they've got like a deep red mahogany, an extra dark walnut, a burnt umber. They're all kind of really close to each other. And I find those I can massage from one to the other pretty well for doing that variety of dark grain lines. If you take a dark, like the Van Dyke Brown or something like that, and then you mix it with just a speck or two of something that's lighter, like they have something they call blonde, which is kind of like this creamy color.
Hmm.
You know, I don't know if you can see that.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like when you mix that in shellac, it almost looks like, like a neutral spruce color or a neutral sandalwood color. That if I take my brown and I mixed, well, if you want to pin to the
Hold on.
to the other thing real quick. So if I've got any one of the
blend all pigments, they stay isolated from each other, right? They're not like a liquid stain that.
no, they're
just-
isolated. So if I just took a speck of the blonde and introduced it to anyone, I don't even remember which one was the blend all, but this dark brown here, I think, is my dark brown dye from my old kit. If I come in here and add a good amount of that to here, you can see what's happening to it. It's getting lighter
Hmm.
in shade. So you can see right there how I'm getting from a darker brown to a lighter brown by introducing a pigment that's lighter, obviously. That you're only going to do with pigments. If I mix this dark brown with, which is a dye, if I mix that dark brown to an orange dye, all that's going to do is turn my orange dye into dark brown. Because when you're dealing with dyes, unless you're dealing with very, very close colors in terms of how deep they are, if you mix a blue dye with a yellow dye, it'll turn green. But if I mix a dark brown dye with, let me try to do it with a clean brush so I don't introduce any pigment. So if I take a dark brown dye and I mix it with the orange here in any significant measure, that's not, forgive me, that's already dry. So if I had, let me get some, let me do this in shellac, since shellac's readily accessible. So if I had say an orange, well, it's, that orange is more kind of very reddish. But I had that mixed up over here, and I added a significant amount of dark brown dye to it. I'm just going to get brown. You know what I'm saying? This brown here is the dominant color over that orange. You can go very light and try to mix the two together to come with a combination between the two, you know. But when you're dealing with dyes, you're dealing with colors that have a tendency to get dominant over one another very quickly, unless you're dealing with colors that mix together to create a third color. If you're dealing with obviously blue and yellow, you're going to wind up with green, or red and blue, you wind up with purple. But in terms of the colors, I have more luck when I'm doing touch-up work with dyes than I do with pigments. Pigments are good, like I said, when I'm trying to hide something. The Van Dyke Brown is a great color for drawing grain lines with. So are some of but if you look at here, for example, if you look at the two caps for the colors of Van Dyke Brown and Raw Umber, they're pretty stinking close to each other. So there are a lot of colors within their color kit that are a little bit different, in terms of their character. But I try to stick with, if I was just doing a few of them, I would try to stick with things that were not close together. So I would get a dark brown, I would get a light sandal color, like the what was it we were just looking at, like the blonde. Yeah, you always want some kind of white pigment, because that will, lighten up a color for you. This is the white pigment that I've been using forever. It's almost down to empty at the bottom. This is also a really good, this is more like the blonde, but a little bit lighter. In the blend all colors, that would probably be, the blonde color would be very close to that. It's a little bit deeper.
Oh, yeah.
If you look at it from in the raw pigment state, that's a little deeper than that. But you could achieve this by mixing some of this together with white and get pretty darn close to that. But then there's, you saw what the red looked like for the trans tint was this red back here. How often are you looking for red that's opaque? So sometimes, that's, to me, if I were to start with any kit, this Jacquard kit is a great place to start, because it's not very expensive at all. And that'll
Like
get
what's the color back there that looks like it turned gray?
this one.
Yeah.
This
Was
one,
that-
I
was
was
that
one of- yeah, I was mixing the brown with the sandalwood, I think.
I was gonna say, like, in that right there, there's just a lot of good information on being careful of mixing dyes and pigments together. They really sometimes you don't get the result that is intuitive.
Well, I do find that the pigment completely obliterates the dye. It completely overtakes the mixture. This, by the way, is a really cool color from Mosier. It's a silver gray color, which is a really nice color to dial back another dye. So if I used that in, for example, let me see over here. If I use that in this orange, let me find a, or in what they were calling orange, which to me looks more like a amber kind of color. So if I grabbed grab a fresh brush, there we go. So if I used a little bit of this gray in there, I overwhelmed it a bit. But now if I mix these two together, that's dialing that color back quite a bit. So it's not very red. And I'm able to get to more of a kind of greeny brown, like, you know, those old Gibson-y kind of colors. You know, so that's giving me orange turned into brown pretty quickly with the introduction of silver. You know, so you can achieve a lot with some colors that you normally wouldn't consider a color that is compatible. You know, so it's kind of thing where I just keep an eye out for what I don't have and see what I can pick up on a bargain. There was once that I picked up, somebody put like 6 or 8 or 10 Mosier colors up on eBay for like, you know, $6 because he had them in the garage and he thought they were no good anymore, and he just put them up and I just grabbed them. But you know, for me, the dyes that I would probably go for are the transols are really cool. If you get yourself a kit of those, they come in a small kit of red, yellow, which is more like an amber, black, which is a great black. It's a nice charcoal black as opposed to that blue black that we're always looking at. Brown, blue, brown, black, red, yellow. That's a great place to start. Or the Jakarta one's a great place to start. The Mosier stuff, if you buy it new, that can be expensive, and it's mind-numbing how bizarre their names are compared to what it actually looks like, as we saw in some of the examples. So that stuff, I only add the Mosier stuff when I'm finding, you know, a deal on it, or I'm looking for a particular color or something like that. The blend all powders, I think I would start with something dark like a Van Dyke brown. The red would be okay, but I would stick to more of the browns. The burnt sienna, the brown, raw sienna, raw umber, those kind of things. Burnt umber. Their black is pretty good, I guess, too. It's pretty close to where was it? Somebody else's black. It was pretty close to I think it was the Transol had a nice black. This, by the way, Mosier has an awesome ebony black that is very, very ebony, but not very blue at all. And it's a great color as well. So it's kind of thing where I don't know if I can accurately answer that question with like the definitive, oh, I would have this, 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 and this. You know, I would start with some of the common reds you would get. You know, get a very dark Van Dyke red, maybe a brown mahogany, which is, burnt sienna is a little on the red side, some of the raw umber and Van Dyke are very close to each other. So it's kind of thing where you just kind of go for a mixture of, what you think you might use. I don't think there's a definitive, especially in the mix all pigments, because the thing with the mix all pigments is that, no, it's not the mix all, the blend all pigments, the Mohawk stuff, is that I'm only using that when I'm either kind of faking the grain lines, and I actually have better luck faking grain lines with dyes than I do pigments, because very often, if I'm relying on a pigment to get those kind of deep, dark grain lines, after I've covered them in either shellac or lacquer, I always have what looks like, I don't know how to describe it. It's almost like makeup. It's like super dark and it's super. So it's like as soon as the light shifts color, that pigment stands out, and it looks like fake grain lines to me. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Whereas with the dyes, I can get a deep, dark brown, and especially if I use some tricks like with a dental tool where I give myself some crevices for the. If you want to remove that pin, you can again. I'll use a dental tool, and if you remove that Doug Tinnett pin.
Yep. We're on you.
Okay. So if I'll use a dental tool, and I'll just scrape little grain lines and dots and dashes, and then I'll come back with that's usually when I'll come back with a pigment and go into the deep grain lines. But I'll even come back with a deep dye, paint it in there, pull it off the surface so it's just in the crevice, and then go over that, whether I'm going over it with a shellac or even go over it with a quick swipe of CA to seal that in, and then I get a better looking grain line that way than very often I do with pigments, because pigments to me, they stand out unless you're going to really take your time and draw them in super fine with a very fine brush. And I've done that, but it's always a mixture. I'm painting with a little bit of pigments, then I'm switching over to a dye for a complementary color, or if something gotten too dark and I want to blot it out with a lighter pigment so I can get that, kind of almost pixelated type of look to an area that I'm trying to touch up and cover up. Did that help at all, or did not really?
Yeah, no, dude, I'm just gonna buy them all.
Then call your Mohawk rep and get a discount.
Doug, where do those and we should probably wrap it up, but where do the Moser dyes come from again?
The Moser dyes, there's a number of places you can find them on the web. I have bought them from Amazon.
I just looked. I don't see them there, but we'll figure it out.
I found them on woodworker.com.
So
Okay,
which-
there's a bunch of woodworking sites that you can get them from.
okay.
I don't remember which ones exactly. I can look it up and get back to you on that one.
Everybody, you want to meet back over on the Luthalong link, and we'll relinquish the link for all the people that want to Luthalong that aren't Ding Kings.
Thanks, Doug.
Thank you. Yeah, everybody on mute and say thank you, Doug.
Thanks, Doug.
Thanks, Doug.
You're welcome. I don't know if that was as
That,
Thank you,
no,
Doug.
that was
Thanks,
really
buddy.
good. I
Awesome,
I saw a lot of good stuff on there.
I'm gonna say
Thanks,
Doug.
Doug. That was great.
Have a good night.
Good night.
Thanks.